Behind Buckingham Palace's glittering façade, a scandal still festers. Once hailed as a war hero, Prince Andrew is now the monarchy's deepest wound, a reminder that privilege can rot from within. When royal expert Richard Eden declared, "Prince Andrew is a liar, and King Charles must now do more," Britain stopped pretending this was just gossip. It was accusation turned revelation. This is the story of how arrogance destroyed legacy, how silence became guilt, and how one interview shattered a dynasty's illusion of decency. For decades, the crown relied on secrecy. Now it faces its reckoning. As the cameras close in and public faith erodes, the question remains, can King Charles save the institution his brother nearly destroyed? Or has the age of royal accountability finally begun? It was meant to be redemption. It became ruin. November 16. The BBC's Newsnight aired an exclusive interview between Prince Andrew and journalist Emily Maitlis. The prince, eager to clear his name of association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, had insisted on the sit down. The palace thought it would humanize him. Instead, it destroyed him. From the moment the cameras rolled, viewers sensed disaster. Andrew appeared confident, even smug, as he denied wrongdoing, but his words landed like stones. He claimed he'd never met Virginia Gifford, who had accused him of sexual assault. He infamously justified his behavior by insisting he was at a Pizza Express in Woking that night, a detail so bizarre it became a cultural punchline. Then came the quote that sealed his fate, "I don't sweat." Meant to discredit a detail in Gifford's story, it instead made him a figure of ridicule. The tone-deaf performance, detached, unrepentant, and oblivious, revealed a royal insulated from reality. Within hours, the backlash was global. Social media exploded. The BBC's newsroom was flooded with disbelief. Even inside the palace, aides whispered that the interview was catastrophic. Overnight, Andrew went from a senior working royal to an international pariah. Sponsors withdrew. Charities severed ties. The Queen, heartbroken but pragmatic, stripped him of public duties. To the outside world, it was a fall from grace. To insiders, it was decades of arrogance catching up with him. His belief that birthright could shield him had collided with a 21st century truth. No title can protect you from public outrage. That Newsnight interview became more than a PR disaster. It was a symbol of a fading era, when royals believed accountability was optional. In the age of transparency, Andrew's misjudgment exposed the monarchy's greatest weakness, its belief that the old rules still applied. And as the dust settled, one question began to rise. If the Queen could no longer protect her son, would King Charles have the courage to act where she could not? For most of his life, Prince Andrew believed himself untouchable. The second son of Queen Elizabeth II, the Spare, once celebrated for his daring in the Falklands War, had grown used to applause and indulgence. The tabloids called him Air Miles Andy, a nickname that masked entitlement as charm. But behind the medals and photo ops was a man shaped by unchecked privilege and a palace culture that mistook deference for respect. After the Newsnight catastrophe, the illusion collapsed overnight. Aides scrambled to control the fallout. Within days, Buckingham Palace corridors buzzed with panic. The Queen's courtiers, horrified by the reaction, realized Andrew's presence endangered the monarchy's credibility. Charities began cutting ties, universities withdrew patronages, and the British public, normally cautious in judging a royal, turned cold. Yet Andrew seemed oblivious. He reportedly told friends the interview had gone very well. That delusion, more than any accusation, sealed his fate. Within a week, he was summoned to Buckingham Palace. Behind closed doors, a 70-year-old monarch confronted her 60-year-old son. The conversation was short, heavy, and final. He would step back from public life for the foreseeable future. In royal language, that meant exile. For decades, Andrew had coasted on charm and lineage. Now he was stripped of duties, stripped of titles, and, most painfully, stripped of access. His once lavish security detail was reduced, his schedule erased. Friends vanished. Even within his own family, doors quietly closed. What hurt most was that it came not from Parliament or public outrage, but from his mother. The Queen, who had shielded her children through decades of scandal, understood that protecting Andrew now could destroy the crown she had spent her life defending. By the time he left the palace that day, the war hero prince had become the monarchy's liability. The fall was not just personal, it was symbolic. The world watched a man raised to believe in immunity finally meet reality. And yet, even in disgrace, he refused to apologize. In private, he still maintained innocence, still insisted on respect. But the monarchy had moved on, and the age of silence had ended. When Queen Elizabeth II passed in 2022, the crown shifted, and with it, the weight of an impossible inheritance. King Charles III ascended not just to the throne, but to a storm. At its center stood his brother Andrew, disgraced, defiant, and still clinging to relevance. For Charles, the dilemma was both political and personal. On one side lay duty, the need to modernize, to prove the monarchy could adapt to a world demanding accountability. On the other, blood, the lifelong bond to the only sibling who had stood beside him through divorces, scandals, and decades of scrutiny. Behind palace walls, strategy meetings grew tense. Advisors warned that any sign of favoritism would taint the new reign. The British public, mourning their queen, expected renewal, not reminders of shame. He must draw a line. One senior courtier whispered to the Times, "Forgiveness cannot mean restoration." Charles hesitated. He had watched his mother's heartbreak when she withdrew Andrew's duties. He understood the pain of fraternal exile. Yet he also knew that the monarchy's survival depends on perception. To appear weak was to invite doubt, and doubt, in a constitutional monarchy, is poison. The coronation planning only deepened the conflict. Should Andrew appear? Should he wear military uniform? Each decision was a moral minefield. Eventually, Charles chose the harder path, restraint without reconciliation. Andrew would attend family events as a private citizen, but his public life was over. Still, whispers persisted that Charles's patience was thinning. When Richard Eden thundered that the king must now do more, he echoed what many Britons felt, that symbolic exile was not enough. True accountability demanded honesty, perhaps even public admission. But the palace, ever cautious, stayed silent. Charles's reign began under the shadow of his brother's disgrace, a burden he neither invited nor could escape. The new king, long mocked as sensitive and cerebral, faced a decision that would define his rule: loyalty to family or loyalty to the crown. He chose the crown, but the cost was visible in every photograph. The wary eyes, the careful distance between brothers at Windsor, the echo of a family once united by ceremony now divided by consequence. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, and abdications, yet nothing tested its moral core quite like the question of what to do with Prince Andrew. For Queen Elizabeth II, the Andrew scandal was not merely a constitutional crisis. It was a mother's heartbreak disguised as diplomacy. She had weathered wars, divorces, political turmoil, and national grief. But nothing wounded her quite like watching her beloved, darling boy unravel before the world's eyes. Andrew had always been her favorite, a truth whispered in palace corridors and confirmed by those closest to her. His birth in 1960 had come after a decade-long gap, marking a new chapter in her family life. Unlike Charles and Anne, born when she was still adjusting to the crown, Andrew had her full attention. She doted on him, called him "my handsome one." He was confident, affectionate, everything his more serious brother was not. When scandal struck decades later, the Queen's instinct was to protect him. She resisted removing his military titles and royal duties, hoping time and dignity might quiet the storm. But the storm only grew louder. Advisors warned her that her silence risked tarnishing not just her reign, but the monarchy itself. In private, she was torn: the monarch who must uphold justice, and the mother who could not bear to see her son shamed. Friends recall her growing isolation during those months. Once a master of composure, she now carried a visible sorrow. Yet her public face never faltered. Even at official engagements, her eyes betrayed a quiet fatigue. In her private papers, she referred to the ordeal as a test of faith. When the decision finally came, that Andrew would step back indefinitely, it was hers and hers alone. Those close to her say she did not speak of it again. But her actions revealed the weight of that choice. She ensured Andrew still joined family gatherings, but without uniform, without titles, without the dignity of service. In her final year, as illness quietly advanced, she made one last maternal gesture, allowing Andrew to accompany her to Prince Philip's memorial, walking by her side through Westminster Abbey. It was not absolution, but love in its final, unspoken form, a mother's last attempt to protect her son while knowing the world would never forgive him. When she passed, Andrew's exile became permanent, but for the Queen, the punishment was hers as well, losing a son not to death, but to disgrace. The British monarchy has always relied on its greatest weapon: silence. Its survival depends not on transparency, but on control of image, of narrative, of scandal. But by 2020, that silence was cracking. The Andrew crisis had become too loud to contain. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic and exhaustion collided. Courtiers who once managed garden parties and investitures were now damage control strategists. Every headline about Andrew threatened to undermine the Queen's carefully built image of moral stability. The palace press office, used to smoothing gossip, found itself drowning in it. The Duke's name appeared daily beside words the Crown had long considered unutterable: sex trafficking, lawsuit, Epstein. The strategy was containment. Remove Andrew from sight, deny interviews, issue sterile statements. But in the social media age, silence reads as guilt. The public, once deferential, now demanded explanations. Why is he not speaking? Why hasn't the police questioned him? The monarchy's centuries-old immunity to accountability had met the digital age, and it was losing. Behind closed doors, factions formed. Some senior aides urged a swift, decisive break, strip Andrew of all privileges and bar him from royal events. Others, loyal to the Queen, warned that too harsh a move could fracture the family during her final years. Every decision risked collateral damage. Meanwhile, outside the palace gates, the press grew bolder. The Daily Mail, The Guardian, and even formerly sympathetic outlets questioned the institution's ethics. Commentators like Richard Eden began to voice what the public was already thinking. The monarchy could no longer pretend that one man's disgrace was separate from the system that had sheltered him. The palace, historically allergic to emotion, was being forced into transparency. But transparency has a cost. It dismantles mystique. To the monarchy, that mystique was its last defense. By 2021, the institution was walking a tightrope. One wrong statement could destroy a reputation. One photo of Andrew smiling at a family event could reignite outrage. The Crown's PR machine, designed for ceremonial stability, was suddenly operating in crisis mode. And at its center sat King Charles, then Prince of Wales, watching the family brand erode in real time, already realizing what he would inherit: not just a throne, but a fractured public trust. The House of Windsor had survived everything, but now its greatest threat was not an enemy nation or a political rival. It was itself. For decades, Britain's press had played by the palace's rules: praise the monarch, scrutinize the politicians, and treat the royals like untouchable celebrities. But by the time Prince Andrew's scandal exploded, those old loyalties had vanished. The media, once deferential, had become the monarchy's fiercest adversary. It began subtly investigative pieces questioning Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. But after the Newsnight interview, subtlety died. Headlines grew brutal: a prince without shame, royal disgrace, the Duke of Denial. What once would have been whispered behind closed doors was now shouted across front pages. For the first time, the palace had lost control of its own story. Television followed. Palace Confidential, Good Morning Britain, and even late-night satire tore into Andrew's defenses. Veteran journalists like Richard Eden, once known for royal access, turned into critics. When Eden declared, "Prince Andrew is a liar, and King Charles must now do more," it was more than a quote. It was a cultural turning point. The unwritten truce between media and monarchy had broken. What made the moment extraordinary wasn't just the accusation, it was its source. This wasn't a Republican or a radical voice, it was the establishment speaking to itself. The message was clear: the monarchy's credibility could not survive denial. Inside the palace, communications officers fought a losing battle. Every attempt to steer the narrative only fueled new headlines. No comment became the most damning comment of all. Andrew's refusal to show contrition, his insistence on privilege, and the palace's reluctance to act decisively all combined into one unforgivable image: arrogance. Public opinion hardened. Polls showed trust in the Duke of York collapsing. Editorials demanded accountability, not symbolism. The monarchy, once immune to the full weight of journalism, now found itself cornered by the very institution that had long protected it. Even royal allies grew uneasy. Some insiders privately admitted that the monarchy needed scrutiny, that sunlight, though harsh, was necessary to preserve the system. But for Andrew, by the end of 2021, one truth was undeniable: the press no longer served the palace, it served the people. And in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already forming. For the British people, trust in the monarchy had always been emotional, not logical. It wasn't built on policy or proof, it was built on faith. The Queen embodied duty, restraint, and quiet strength. But as the Andrew saga unfolded, that sacred trust began to fracture. The outrage wasn't only about what he had done, but what he represented. To ordinary citizens struggling with economic hardship, seeing a prince accused of exploiting privilege felt like betrayal. The monarchy, long seen as the nation's moral compass, suddenly seemed like an institution shielding one of its own from accountability. Outside Buckingham Palace, protesters gathered with placards reading, "No justice, no crown." Online hashtags like "Fen abolish the monarchy" began to trend, once unthinkable in a country that revered its queen. Newspapers ran polls showing that more than half of Britons believed Andrew should lose all titles permanently. The royal family's silence, once interpreted as dignity, now felt like evasion. The tone of public debate shifted. People no longer asked whether Andrew was guilty, but whether the monarchy itself was complicit. Each photograph of him attending church with his mother was interpreted as hypocrisy, a sign that status outweighed morality. The very sight of him near royal events stirred anger that decades of scandal had failed to provoke. And yet, there was tragedy in the fury. For many, the monarchy was part of their identity. Its fall would feel like losing a piece of Britain itself. But the younger generation, raised in a world of transparency and accountability, refused to protect an institution unwilling to evolve. They didn't see monarchy as destiny, they saw it as privilege. When Richard Eden and other commentators demanded that King Charles do more, They spoke for millions who had grown tired of excuses. The age of unquestioning reverence had ended. By early 2023, surveys revealed the monarchy's approval ratings slipping to their lowest in decades. Trust had been replaced by curiosity, respect by skepticism. The palace could no longer rely on nostalgia, it needed action. The British public, once the crown's most loyal ally, had become its conscience, and that conscience was now demanding truth, not ceremony. In Britain's world of royal reporting, few names carry as much weight as Richard Eden, a veteran journalist, insider, and longtime observer of palace life. For years, Eden maintained a tone of respect, even affection, toward the monarchy. He was part of a media establishment that prized access over confrontation. But that changed the day he uttered 6 words on Palace Confidential: "Prince Andrew is a liar." It wasn't hyperbole, it was fury, the restrained kind that only insiders can express. Eden had spent decades watching the monarchy manage scandal after scandal with charm and denial. But Andrew's conduct, and the palace's failure to address it, marked a breaking point. If the monarchy is to survive, Eden said, it cannot protect a seat. The statement ricocheted across British media. In hours, it was trending on social platforms and replayed on every network. What startled observers wasn't the accusation itself, but its source, a royalist, had turned reformer. Eden's credibility gave his words gravity. This wasn't gossip, it was judgment. In follow-up segments, Eden doubled down. He accused Andrew of hiding behind privilege and urged King Charles to act decisively to save the monarchy's moral authority. Other journalists echoed the sentiment. The Daily Mail, The Telegraph, even usually cautious outlets like Hello, published editorials urging reform. The monarchy's protective circle was cracking from within. Inside palace walls, the quote landed like thunder. Courtiers dismissed it publicly, but insiders admitted it had hit a nerve. The king's advisors feared that silence might appear as complicity. They debated whether to issue a response, but tradition won. The crown does not answer commentary. Yet the damage was done. The public had heard truth from someone they trusted. Eden's words represented something larger, the shifting tide of royal journalism. The days of uncritical reverence were over. The press, once a shield, had become the mirror the monarchy could no longer avoid. When asked later if he regretted his statement, Eden replied simply, "Loyalty means telling the truth, even when it hurts." It was the kind of honesty the monarchy itself had forgotten how to speak. For King Charles, the Andrew scandal was more than a family embarrassment. It was the first great test of his reign. As monarch, he had promised, slimmed down, accountable, modern crown. But modernity demands courage, and courage often begins at home. Behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, the tension was palpable. Advisors debated the optics of permanent exile. Could a king banish his brother without appearing cruel? Could he forgive without appearing weak? Every option risked backlash. The new monarch, still earning public trust after decades as the heir in waiting, had little margin for error. Charles's personal feelings were complicated. He had long seen Andrew as the reckless sibling, charming, impulsive, and heedless of consequence. Their relationship had never been easy, yet the king knew that how he handled Andrew would define his credibility. The crown had survived scandals before, but never in an era of live-streamed outrage and digital memory. In early 2023, after private consultations with senior courtiers, Charles took a decisive step. He quietly removed Andrew's access to royal residences for official use and permanently barred him from public duties. The message was clear. The monarchy's moral contract mattered more than blood. Still, he stopped short of full dissownment. Andrew retained his title, his security, and limited financial support, a compromise that satisfied no one entirely. Critics called it half-measured, loyalists called it humane. Charles called it necessary. The institution must endure, he told aides. Family is secondary. Public reaction was divided. Some applauded his firmness, others accused him of hesitation. But one thing was undeniable: the crown had spoken, not through words, but through distance. The Duke of York's invisibility became his punishment. For the king, it was a balancing act between compassion and survival. For the monarchy, it was a declaration. The old rule of silent protection was over. Charles's reign, once expected to be ceremonial, had begun with confrontation. He had inherited a family bound by privilege and fractured by scandal. And in Andrew's shadow lay every unresolved question about monarchy in the modern world. The reckoning had begun, and this time even the crown could not escape the mirror of accountability. Every generation of royals has faced its reckoning. Abdications, divorces, political unrest, but none has confronted an era like this. The digital age has turned royalty into reality television, and the public, once content with ceremony, now demands substance. In that world, the old model of loyalty and silence no longer works. King Charles understands this better than anyone. His own life has been a public lesson in redemption. For decades, he was mocked as the awkward heir, overshadowed by Donna, scrutinized for his beliefs, doubted for his temperament. But now, the same man once dismissed as irrelevant stands as the bridge between tradition and transparency. His challenge: to prove that the monarchy can be moral in a time when morality is measured in real-time tweets. The Andrew scandal, painful as it is, has become a mirror for what's at stake. The monarchy's value has always rested on public trust, not political power. Once that trust fractures, the crown is just jewelry. To survive, the Windsors must redefine relevance through service, humility, and accountability. Younger royals like Prince William and Princess Catherine embody that effort. They are cautious, modern, disciplined, a brand of monarchy fit for social media scrutiny. But their success depends on distance from the past. Every photograph, every speech, every gesture must quietly erase the memory of Andrew's scandal. The monarchy can no longer rely on mystique. The Queen's silent strength worked in an age of respect and restraint. But in a world that prizes confession and authenticity, silence looks like guilt. King Charles's task is to evolve the royal story from untouchable to human, from divine right to earned respect. If he succeeds, the institution may yet endure another century. If he fails, history will remember his reign not for reform, but for denial. The crown has always symbolized continuity, but continuity without courage is just decay. Even as the palace seeks calm, the echo of Prince Andrew's disgrace refuses to fade. Every new photograph of him, leaving Windsor, attending a family service, walking beside his mother's coffin, reignites the conversation. In the age of endless archives, scandal never dies, it only sleeps until the next headline wakes it. The tragedy of Andrew's downfall lies not only in what he did, but in what it revealed: a royal culture that confused privilege with purpose. For decades, the monarchy shielded him from consequence, believing his title could silence criticism. But instead, it amplified it. In trying to protect him, the crown exposed itself. Historians already note the irony that a family built on image was undone by its inability to read the modern one. When the Newsnight interview aired, it wasn't just Andrew's miscalculation. It was the monarchy's misreading of its own people. The public no longer wants perfection, it wants honesty. Richard Eden's words, "The king must now do more," still reverberate, not as tabloid theater but as prophecy. The monarchy's challenge isn't Andrew's guilt or innocence, it's relevance. Can an institution built on secrecy survive in an age obsessed with exposure? The answer lies in how it learns from the noise. If the monarchy continues to hide behind no comment, it will fade into irrelevance. If it speaks with humility, it may yet earn forgiveness. But forgiveness, like faith, must be renewed through truth. Even now, the palace's silence feels heavy, not regal but fearful. And fear is the one thing royalty cannot afford to show. The Windsors must learn that transparency is not weakness, it's evolution. Prince Andrew may have lost everything, but the monarchy still stands, bruised, not broken. Whether it survives another century depends on what it does next to protect its image or reclaim its integrity. The echoes of scandal are not curses, they are warnings. And history has never been kind to those who ignore them. In the end, every monarchy learns the same truth. It is not blood that preserves the crown, but belief. The British monarchy has survived revolutions, wars, and divorces, not because it is perfect, but because people wanted to believe it represented something more than themselves. But belief, like glass, can shatter quietly, and once broken, it rarely mends the same. The saga of Prince Andrew was more than one man's downfall, it was a revelation. It exposed the fragility of an institution built on reputation, not accountability. The palace's greatest strength, its silence, had become its weakness. What once shielded dignity now sheltered deceit. When historians look back on this era, they won't see a single scandal in isolation. They'll see a pattern, a monarchy forced, step by step, into confrontation with modernity. From Diana's confessions to Harry's rebellion to Andrew's disgrace, each episode stripped away another layer of mystique until only humanity remained. And perhaps that is the crown's final lesson: survival requires humility. The royal family must now learn to exist not as symbols above scrutiny, but as citizens under it. That means speaking plainly, admitting fault, and letting light into corridors once kept in shadow. King Charles knows this. He has lived through the slow unmasking of monarchy, from its golden illusion to its human flaws. The Andrew affair may be his greatest test, but also his greatest opportunity to prove that monarchy can still evolve without losing meaning. The Queen's reign was about endurance, his must be about honesty. For 1,000 years, the crown has relied on silence, but now, silence has become noise, and truth, its last defense. If the monarchy is to endure, it must remember what even kings forget: that respect cannot be inherited. It must be earned again and again. The monarchy stands at a crossroads. between legacy and accountability. Richard Eden's words, "Prince Andrew is a liar," were not gossip but a verdict. The public no longer bows to silence, it demands truth. King Charles must now decide whether to protect blood or principle, because history remembers choices, not excuses. The crown's strength lies not in gold or lineage, but in honesty. For centuries, the Windsors ruled by mystery. Now they must rule by transparency. The age of secrecy is over. If you believe power should answer to truth, share this story, raise the conversation, and keep the crown accountable. The future of monarchy depends on those who dare to question it.